Hey, it's Meg. Welcome back to my channel. This week on the journaling workshop, we are going to be looking at journal backgrounds. So whether it's an art journal, a junk journal, creative journal, any type of journal, we are going to look at some different techniques that I like to use in my journals. I'll share some top tips and tricks, and I'm also going to show you guys a journal that I don't think I've actually shown on YouTube before, which is exciting, so stay tuned for that one. It's a little bit different to what I normally share on this channel, but I think it will give you some ideas and inspiration hopefully, and encourage you to play with the different types of backgrounds in your journals. So what we're looking at the moment is one of my absolute favourite, my nearest and dearest type of background, and that is to use tea and coffee staining to create a bit of a vintage look to your backgrounds. So you can use this either across an entire spread and really help to age the pages, or you can apply it in different sections, and you'll have seen there in some of the close-ups that you can get some really nice detailing on different areas and make it look a little bit splotchy. So my personal preference for how I like to do this is just to use a good old paintbrush. So don't use anything that you're precious about for this. This is literally just a cheap paintbrush, and I use it all across the page just to apply I think this is coffee that I'm using. So coffee will typically give you a bit of a darker staining than tea, but yeah, I just apply it straight onto my journal pages. If you want to dye like whole sheets for your journals and have them as like pre-made backgrounds almost, then there are videos out there on YouTube that show you the entire process of tea staining your papers and sort of laying them out into trays and giving them a bit of a like tea bath almost, and laying them out to dry. But I just really love the texture that tea dyeing adds. Makes things nice and crinkly, and if you dry it with like a heat gun or a hair dryer, you can get really nice effects around the edges of where the coffee staining has been. And another fun way to add really nice texture to your journal backgrounds is to use tissue paper in combination with the coffee and tea dyeing. So you'll see here I've just got some plain white tissue paper and also some pink tissue paper, because I clearly couldn't let that go in the recycling. That had to be journal fodder. And what I'm doing is I'm gluing the tissue paper directly onto my background. Now I have done it in the past, and I do like to add the tea staining like directly onto the tissue, and then use that as a way of like layering up in my collage. However, if you've not kind of done that before, the tissue paper can be really quite fragile, and it's very easy to rip it. So if you're worried about that, what I'd recommend doing is gluing it straight onto your journal page. So scrunch it up a bit first, glue it on, and as you're adding it to the page, try and like crinkle it up in some areas, and kind of scrunch it together so that you're not lying it completely flat. I've just trimmed the edges here, and then what you'll see is when I come in with my paintbrush and the coffee will kind of sit along all of those wrinkles and gather, and it just creates a really nice grungy effect that you can then do some collaging on top of. You can add all sorts of different embellishments, and it's just a really fun way to create a textured art journal background. And you can use it in loads of different ways as well. So you could try it with different coloured tissue papers and using it maybe on just part of the page. You could add it just to one corner. There's loads of different ways that you could use this technique. But I just really love the effect you can see there that it gives on my journal page. So that is definitely a favourite of mine, is to use tea and coffee. Next, I wanted to talk about mixed media art journal backgrounds. So this is something, like I said, a little bit different, and this journal's from a couple of years ago, where I basically had this Moleskine art journal, and I decided to use it exclusively just for playing with different backgrounds. So no pressure, no stress of making anything perfect. I was literally just playing with my materials. So if you are in a position where maybe you're just getting started, or you're not quite sure what you want to do with backgrounds, then either having a journal you can just play with lots of different ideas and experiment, or even using blank sheets of paper first to try out using different materials, different combinations, whether that's colours, layouts, things like that for your backgrounds, is a really great way to get started and to not have that pressure to create something amazing. And I like to use this as a bit of a reference point for when I'm wanting to create something that's a little bit more mixed media. I can kind of come back to this, flick through it, and kind of be inspired by myself almost. So there's little areas of details in here, full backgrounds, bits where I've just played around, and this literally has like paints, crayons, markers, you name it, I've thrown it at this journal. And it's just a really fun way to play with different ideas and techniques. So it's definitely something I would recommend if you're wanting to experiment with your backgrounds. Grab yourself a spare journal, or, you know, grab some papers, fold them in half, create yourself a little journal, and just do some different backgrounds and use the things you have. Think about the different colours that you're using and the way the materials all play with each other. So for my example here, I have some acrylic ink by Daler Rowney in the colour Burnt Sienna, and I'm just adding a few little drops to this journal insert. And then I came in with my paintbrush and some water to spread it around on the page. Now, when I first did this, because I really love my muted toned back colours, this was really quite bright for me, but I decided to go with it because I did also really like the richness of the colour. I really liked that. I just wasn't so keen on how vibrant it was, but I decided that as soon as I'm just playing around with it, I was working with it, trying to add a bit more water to it. And so that's why I was focusing on sort of the lower 2/3 of this journal page as well, so I didn't completely cover the background. And it dried down a little bit more muted, but I still really wanted to push it back. So I then came in with some just white acrylic paint and decided to apply it in different areas to push back and create more of a muted background. And this would also then allow me to start thinking about where I wanted my focal point on this page and being able to have something that's not completely busy and overwhelming, and start thinking again about the composition of the page. So you can see I'm really focusing this white paint in the center of the page, so I'm not completely covering up the burnt sienna, because where it dried, much like the tea and the coffee, there's those little areas of detail, and those were something that I wanted to keep on the page. I didn't want to cover those up. I just wanted to soften and push back certain areas, and also adding these bits of white paint was also a way of adding more texture to my backgrounds. So if you're someone who really loves texture, then things like stamping and stencils, especially if the paint's wet, you know, you could maybe press I don't know, even like the lid of something into your paint to create different textures within the paint and the background. You could even maybe use kind of string to do backgrounds. There's so many different ways that you can add different interest to your journal backgrounds. And you can see here, this is something that's a little bit more simplistic, but it's just a nice way if you want to start adding bits of mixed media to your journal, but you're not necessarily really comfortable with going full-blown mixed media everywhere. Then adding little details like this, so you could almost do this in like just a corner of a page, or maybe you could apply these techniques to a tag that you add into your journal. There's lots of different ways to incorporate things like this into your journaling practice. Next week on the journaling workshop, we'll be looking at how you can start using words and text within journal pages. So I'll be sharing some tips and ideas and inspiration for that. So stay tuned for next week. As always, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye guys.